Good morning and welcome to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the education and empowerment of all people struggling and family members struggling with their loved one's substance use disorder. And today I'm just going to cut right to my handsome guest here, Mr. Steve Chasman, the Executive Director of the Long Island Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependency,
Yes.
LICAD, 60 years strong. So you do such great work. And today we're going to go right to the hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that we could talk about. And this will probably lead into many other different things. Legalization of recreational use of marijuana and how that's going to impact certainly adolescents, certainly so many aspects of our life, and people's perception of what that's supposed to look like. Thoughts, Steve?
Well, Linda, always thank you for having us on your show. You know, here we are, not even yet emerged from a public health crisis around opiates, which, and you and I have done this for 10 years, is not just opiates. It's a substance use disorder.
Yes.
People don't wake up and say, today's the day I use heroin.
Right.
It happens in a substance use progression. And first off, let me say this. I'm not here respectfully to comment on public policy, that of the county or the state or the federal government. You're asking a licensed healthcare professional if the legalization of marijuana is going to adversely or positively impact public health.
Yes.
And based on my professional experience in 25 years as a social worker working in and around substance use disorders, and quite frankly, being a Long Islander raised here, who's a Suffolk County resident but raised in Nassau, I suspect and have data to show, based on a 63-year-old organization that I'm fortunate to be working for, this legalization of marijuana and having a wide accessibility to what is today a very potent mind and mood altering substance
Yes.
will likely adversely impact the public health of not only adolescents and young adults, but even adults.
All people, because, you know, I think what many people, probably an older generation, seem to think is that it's the pot that perhaps they smoked in the 70s or 80s. And it is so far from that. The potency, it's genetically altered. And again, the potency is causing psychotic breaks in adolescent.
Yep.
It is accelerating mental health disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar in adolescence. So
I think, you know, at some point, America, Long Island, New York, we need to really answer a greater question around substances.
why? Why do you need this?
And ultimately, listen, at LICAD, and we have 4 offices in 2 counties, as you know, we don't really get stuck on legal or illegal.
You know what? And it is the furthest thing from
There's people who come into our offices using illicit or illicit substance. We don't ask them, you know, about the law, so to speak. But we do know, because we do thorough assessments, that if they come in with presenting issues with a substance use disorder, not some, not most, but virtually every single one of the 15,000 clients we see annually, marijuana plays a significant role.
Yes.
Is that a concrete data source for a gateway drug? Well, like with any mind and mood altering substance, there's going to be people who are going to use it. There are people who are going to misuse it. And for some, there are people who will abuse and become dependent on it, and it will be a stopover to other things. Now, in a couple of weeks, we go back, but we go to the Harvard University Addictions Conference every year. And a term they've been throwing out regarding chronic marijuana use, which they define as 5 times weekly.
Okay.
Now, a lot of the adolescents we meet with, they smoke 5 times before noon. But there's a word that they're associating to chronic marijuana use. And you're right, the strains are significantly higher than Mother Nature ever intended them to be. The term is amotivational syndrome. That they have all of these responsibilities academically, intellectually, family, relationships, athletically, and then they engage in this mind and mood altering substance. Today we're talking about marijuana, and somehow all of these chores, tasks, responsibilities don't get completed. So marijuana does have the ability to hijack your ability to develop, pursue, and achieve your goals, both in the short term or the long term.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, if you turn a blind eye, and we have marijuana, we also have alcohol use. And parents still, and the way they say it to me is, they're not doing that heroin stuff. But because you're whispering that's a good thing, but you don't mind that they're still using marijuana and alcohol?
There's a denial that's been in America where here we are all talking and the front page, and it needed to be, and you and I have tried to correct our electorate. This is not just opiates. Last year, 72,000 Americans died of fatal opioid-related deaths.
Yes.
There were 88,000 alcohol-related fatalities. And by the way, and you've been to Thrive, and we had a sober Super Bowl, in between at $2 million, 30 seconds, or whatever it is, in between alcohol commercials, a sporting event, whereas to celebrate the heightened achievement of athletics became one of the biggest drinking or alcohol abuse days. So
does St. Patrick's Day this coming weekend has just become a drunken fest day, right? So
well, instead of appreciating, Irish contribution to the American fabric, somehow along the way it became another excuse for individuals who aren't Irish to debauch themselves with alcohol, which is a toxin. And in America, we love to kind of categorize and say these drugs okay, these drugs not okay, when in reality, all mind and mood altering substances, including nicotine, including very potent strains of marijuana, have the potential for use, misuse, abuse, and dependence. I think there was, and this is the one thing I'll say about policy, and I know people have talked about it ad infinitum, other states have not legalized it, they have decriminalized it. Let me say this as someone who does, LICAD does significant work in the Nassau and Suffolk County jails.
Yes.
We thank District Attorney Sini and Police Commissioner Hart. We have diversion programs in place and contracts and trying to divert people away. We don't think people who use marijuana products, including wax and dabs and THC oils, belong incarcerated.
Correct.
That's a separate conversation.
That's a whole separate conversation.
But,
absolutely, we're not talking about the arresting people, especially minorities. In past years have really been
disproportionately incarcerated.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about do I want to be driving down the LIE, which is an adventure in and of itself, with people that are altered because now you can smoke and not be in trouble for it, right?
Well, we hope that that's enforced and the message is made clear, and maybe that's why we're here to talk. I mean, as we move towards legalization, and so be it if that's the politicians and the voting public's choice, as we move towards legalization, what messaging is going to be constant and thorough in schools at a very young age? You and I have sat here to Albany to DC talking about evidence-based prevention models, 12 through K, which still hasn't happened in every school on Long Island or across New York State. And, what kind of messaging is going to be across New York State, letting people know that all mind and mood altering substances have the potential for misuse and abuse. And under no circumstance should you be operating a vehicle or a major machinery.
We don't, and we don't have the capacity to test. Alcohol, yes. Police officers can test for alcohol. You cannot test for marijuana. Right, at this stage of the game.
That's right. So there's no real-time test for it. And listen, even the dialogues of, someone who's shooting heroin, if they smoke marijuana, isn't that healthier or at least a harm reduction tactic? Yeah, it's a harm reduction tactic.
It is a harm reduction tactic.
But ultimately, and self-help has a phrase for that, it's like switching seats on the Titanic.
Right.
Which is, we're still trying, and SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Administration, they have a definition of recovery. A definition of recovery, and if we think of the word recovery, and I'm blessed in that I see a host of people in my personal and professional life who are in recovery from substance use disorders, which is a serious psychiatric condition, it's not just finding some semblance of mental order. It's also recovering an aspect of your family life, your financial life, your academic or vocational life, getting back into school or work, and really being on a path to recover the ability to meet your full potentials.
Absolutely.
Marijuana, and young people try to nail me down all the time. How many people overdosed on marijuana? Zero.
Right.
But ask me how many people I know professionally and personally have not met their fullest potentials, biopsychosocially, spiritually, vocationally, financially, because they stay stifled in the sedated effects that are very potent forms of marijuana can produce.
Absolutely. They don't want to get out of their basement.
So we have there's a credo in social work or human service. We're here to empower people. Certainly your show is empowering people.
I love the word empower.
But how do you empower when you're throwing a wet towel over the light of ambition and motivation? And listen, our data is skewed. If you show up at the Long Island Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, we have you at hello. You're either mandated or mom-dated. Something's not
going on.
So
right.
the people that are smoking marijuana with impunity and going about their lives and not experiencing consequences, we don't see them, granted.
Correct.
But I think we'd be denying the public health reality that there are a host of people based on genetic predispositions, based on adverse childhood experiences, and just the effects of the drug itself does have the ability to sedate, to unmotivate, or, in keeping with the Harvard School, amotivational, to steal your motivation.
And is that what we want for, as a parent, right? You can't negate the effects of alcohol. Just because you did it doesn't make it okay, because kids of today do everything to the upteenth degree for some reason. That it's the eyeglass wash, right? And flooding your eye with pure vodka, or soaking tampons and putting them in places for boys and girls, so that there's no smell of alcohol. That's an issue. That's something that we really need to look at. And in Good Sam Hospital, being a proud part of the Sherpa program, most of the cases that we've seen, we have recovery coaches there in lieu of the opiate epidemic, but the majority of cases that are seen is due to alcoholism. So doesn't that tell us something about the demographics of Long Island still?
Absolutely. And we're the 24-hour line for Suffolk County. We have been. We just got our contract renewed. So we could tell you that over the last 8 to 9 months, the calls we're getting at 4 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon are opiates are number 2. Alcohol is number 1. But, I fear that some of our data, and maybe the data across Long Island and the state, is also skewed.
I believe that too.
As hey, listen, I'm withdrawing from heroin. We talk to them on the phone. Now, if we're being thorough, and we hope that we are, but sometimes maybe we're not in the interest of being useful at the time. Okay, we hear heroin, we think detox, we think harm reduction, but we have to ask the question. Listen, we're going to get you to detox. What other drugs are you using?
Yes.
Marijuana is always in there. We tend to focus, they're presenting as their drug of choice as opiates. But do you smoke? Oh, yeah, I smoke marijuana. But I'm not calling you for that. I'm calling you for opiates.
Yes.
I've been smoking marijuana since I'm 13, and now you're 25 and shooting heroin. But we'd be denying. It's like the second story of a house. If the second story is on fire, the first story plays a role.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because that's the foundation. So if we really want to look at etiology or cause, it didn't happen, and maybe this is true with your personal story as well, with your family, because I have my own personal stories. People don't wake up and say heroin. They start with alcohol, marijuana, and nicotine, and that's
the 3 things that my Thomas started with.
And those are not innocuous, as alcohol
No,
kills
they are
more
not.
Long Islanders and Americans than any other drug. And we're looking at CDC, Centers for Disease Control, national epidemics around the vaping of nicotine, which is a stimulant. And of course, we're looking at high levels of highly concentrated THC in marijuana, genetically and hydroponically enhanced THC oils that young people are using, getting the mixed message. If they're going to legalize it, therefore, it's a very short leap to, therefore, it wouldn't be harmful.
Correct. Because they think it's not harmful.
Well, why would the government legalize something that's harmful to us?
Well, that's a whole nother show, Steve.
No, but right. And you and I as adults know.
Yes.
But as LICAD and your team, the Sherpas, and we speak to adolescents all day long. We speak to 30,000 students in 109 Long Island schools. And we hear it from our educators where it's like, oh, they're going to legalize marijuana. It's a very short leap to. Why would the government legalize something that's harmful?
Correct.
And we've seen this before.
And you get the rug pulled out from underneath you, you can build all these skills into children, and then they hear that messaging. Or kids that are really struggling with a substance use disorder, who then say, you can't withhold, marijuana's legal. You can't withhold that from me. You can't.
So we've seen this before too, and I'll give examples in the great power that the tobacco industry wields. It's the only product put out by the FDA that they don't have to list the 2,000 carcinogens in there, the only ingredients. We know that it's cancer-producing agents, right?
Correct.
And the other thing I can think of is gambling.
Absolutely.
Where they went to the legalization not just of the lottery, but of casino gambling in New York State. Gambling or gambling addiction is a horrific family disease that not only consumes the individual, much like substance use, another
Absolutely.
addiction, but it impacts the whole family and community. And with a good arm, which I don't have, we could throw a baseball to that 58 or what. 24 hours a day, people mixing alcohol, mixing other drugs, and we've had evidence of that.
Well, they had the baby that was left on the bus stop out in front of Jake's because their parents were inside.
As an advocate, and I know you are too, at the risk of, it's not criticism, but we're stating the obvious that we're getting a very mixed message from governments where, and listen, a legislator once said, and I happened to be at a press conference where he said it. He said, listen, if the state is experiencing fiscal deficits, maybe getting into the drug business with the legalization isn't the best way to close that gap. Now, if you take that statement at face value, it's a great question mark.
It is a great question mark. But, the governor also said yesterday he wants it done by June.
Okay.
He wants it done by June.
I think we've had a great champion in Governor Cuomo with the opiate epidemic.
And I've actually said it to him because we have had a great champion and he's done so much.
Right.
But you can't talk out both sides of your mouth. You cannot do that because you know the harmful effects. And just because Massachusetts is doing it, just because your surrounding states are doing it, that's not a reason, because it goes back to listening to my father say, I don't care what all the other people are doing. You're not. So what is the messaging that we want to come across as?
Well, this is probably a different show, but, it's almost ironic where you look at Massachusetts and you look at some of the class action suits that are going on with the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma, where they intentionally misled U.S. prescribers and pharmaceutical companies in producing very highly potent, addictive opioids. And then simultaneously in Brooklyn, someone's on trial as a drug kingpin or a drug lord, who happened to be Mexican, who's producing illicit drugs at the same time, but he's revered as this, arch criminal, and I'm sure he is.
Exactly.
And we trust the U.S. judicial system or international cartels of illicit drugs. But, it's a very interesting argument to look at how
it is a very interesting
argument. There are two entities in a cartel or in a pharmaceutical company that both flooded American streets and markets with very potent, lethal drugs, one licit, one illicit, one legal, one illegal, one reputable, one irreputable.
But produce the same effect.
Produce the same effects.
Produce the same effects.
Destroying the lives of individuals, destroying the lives of families, and as a whole, destroying communities. And in fact, really putting a country in the midst of a public health crisis, better referred to as an epidemic.
It is an epidemic, and we use the United States of America uses the most opiates in the world. And we have one of the smallest populations, really, compared to the rest of the world.
So I think at some point America needs to have a broader conversation about why drugs in America, what drugs mean to America, including alcohol and marijuana, and how we really are not going to piecemeal address this, but really address this as a nation. Is it something that moves entirely towards legalization and regulation and quality control and taxability and that whole thing? Because right now it feels like we're compartmentalizing. People are individuals, therefore they have drugs of choice. In fact, there are great studies that are going on right now where, based on adverse childhood experiences, they're tracking young people. Listen, if you had a lot of loss and you were younger or abuse, you moved towards the painkillers. If you're shy and very reserved, you moved more towards the stimulants and alcohol that bring you,
interesting.
Addiction science is moving so far as, we may be able to predict what kind of mind and mood altering substance would, quote unquote, complement the shortcomings in
feeling?
our
Yes.
personality, so we can, the illusion of feeling like a whole individual, when in reality, these synthetic coping skills from marijuana and alcohol to heroin and cocaine are not healthy in the long run. This is why the evidence-based prevention models we've been pushing for, yourself included.
That's what I was just going to say, because when you can empower 5-year-olds moving up through grade school, junior high, to have coping skills,
Right.
and to have really great communication skills.
That's what it's about.
To be able to say, well, I feel like this, and be able to share that with other people, and to have the mindfulness in your classmates, not to be bullied, not to be made fun of, but to be accepted for who we are. When we bring community back and acceptance back,
Right.
and that's the normal, what you accept,
There'll be no need for drugs.
there would be no need for drugs.
And you hit the nail on the head. You know, K through 6, whether it's life skills or too good for drugs, it's healthy communication skills.
Yes.
Young people have a universal word for it today. Whatever. How you feeling? Whatever.
What, exactly right.
Well, we hear it all day long with people that visit us, and it's not easy talking to a stranger or a therapist. But, you know, teachers, parents, we have to give them the language to understand the full spectrum of emotions and be able to communicate that. Healthy coping skills like athletics or exercise, self-expression like music and art programs. By the way, the first thing to go in budget cuts.
Or all those things.
Understanding our devices, our phones, are there to assist us, but not to consume us. We make unfair or unrealistic comparisons to people who are on other people's social media page saying, what's wrong with me? Knowing darn well that we all post this grand picture of
oh my goodness, it's all lies.
And Freud was laughing because the ego is not who we are. The ego is who I want you to think I am.
Yeah.
But in reality, all human beings are a bunch of scaredy cats. We all
Absolutely.
we're all fallible. We're all insecure. We're all walking into crowded rooms saying, I hope they like me in some level. Adolescence, because that's a precarious time. But when you introduce a highly potent strains of marijuana that have been genetically and hydroponically engineered to be a lot more potent than Mother Nature ever intended. And this isn't a bunch of hippies from Colorado with long gray hair and tie-dyes like, hey, legal marijuana. These are men and women in $10,000 suits with a multi-billion-dollar business model geared towards our kids.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know if you've had...
Pop-Tarts, gummy bears, Sour Pot Kids.
Come on.
So if the marketing is addressed towards adults, that's not the marketing that you would use.
And if you've had the luxury, and I have, in California, being in one of the dispensaries, first of all, they flag you in off the street. My experience was in Venice, California. They flag you in off the street. They have flaggers out there, you know, and it's just like you said. It's glitter, it's gummy bears, it's Pop-Tarts. This is not geared towards a 49-year-old man who wants to use marijuana on a Saturday night and watch reruns of Seinfeld. This is geared towards, yeah, but much like, and we learn this, you know, history is prologue, meaning like we have to learn. This is what the tobacco industry did to rope the next generation of people hooked on cigarettes. And now vaping. And by the way, big companies like Coca-Cola and R.J. Reynolds are in for hundreds of billions of dollars in the legalization of marijuana movement because they see a fiduciary opportunity. But
they do.
At the risk of what?
Our health.
Thank you.
Period. That's what it is. But so you're an adolescent and you take whatever that cookie is, if it's an eighth of a cookie, and you have to wait maybe an hour to have an effect from that. What's an adolescent going to do? It's been 30 seconds. I didn't feel anything. I'll eat the rest of the cookie. We'll be right back after this message. Crazy.
Too much
Crazy stuff. No.
I get wrong. You know?
Absolutely not.
One, two, three. Long before my dream of playing professional football became real, addiction impacted my family and nearly destroyed it. As a New Yorker, I can tell you that all our communities are being hurt by addiction. New York State is leading the fight in combating addiction, providing help and treatment regardless of your ability to pay. For more information, visit combataddiction.ny.gov. Growing up as a young kid when addiction was around was tough. You know, it was, at the time, I felt like it was unfair. I had to grow up quick. At the age of 11, my father left the house after, a couple months after I found drug paraphernalia in their nightstand. And it was a tough reality to face as a young kid. And, there were good days and bad days, but there were a lot of bad ones. After my father left, we got kicked out of homes. There were people in and out of my house, and I didn't understand, why did this happen to me? Why did addiction why did my parents have to be addicted to drugs? Yeah, going through recovery it was a long road. When I was a senior in high school, my mother went away to prison. I had to go through my college recruiting by myself. I had to go off to college. My friends' parents took me to college. And so it was tough going through those times. But when my mom decided that she wanted to change her life, she wanted to get help. My mom got sober in prison. She got out of prison and gave up drugs and regained her relationship with God. My mother works for the church now, and we have a great relationship. I tell her every time I talk to her how proud I am of her and what she's accomplished. She's a tough woman. She's been through a lot, but the things that she's done after prison have been amazing. I'm so proud of her. She got her associate's degree. We have a great relationship. She's a great grandmother to my nieces and nephews, to my children. She's always there for me when I need to talk to her, and we have a great relationship. For a while, it looked like, when you're in it, when you were in the addiction part of it, I never thought my mom would be the same. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can change your life, you can get help, and you can have a better life and regain those relationships and have a positive effect on those people around you. I look at, when I go through tough times in my life, I ask myself, what would my mom do? Because my mom has been through, I always say my mom has been to hell and back, and she's doing great, and I'm thankful for it, and I'm proud of her. My father as well. I didn't have the best relationship with my father. When he left the house when I was 11, he left us with no car. I didn't speak to him for 3 years, and that was probably the toughest time of my life. But we gained that relationship back. My father's been clean for 3 years. His health is doing better. He's trying to be a better grandfather, trying to be a better father. And, I forgive him. And our relationship is, we're back communicating, and I love it, I tell him I'm proud of him as well, because it's a tough circumstance. It's easy to look at someone who's in addiction and blame them, and blame them for the choices they make. But it's the drugs, it's the alcohol that have a hold of them. And they don't want to be in that position. You have to understand that. They don't want to be making these decisions. They don't want to put these people in jeopardy. They want to get help. But once they decide to get help and to do something about it, there's great things that can happen at the end. Yeah, recovery is possible, and it happens to a lot of people. You'd be surprised at how many people are in recovery right now that went out and got help. People out there that want to help you if you're in recovery. There are people all over who you have no idea went through, they've been affected by it. Whether it's a family member, a friend, themselves personally, if they went through addiction. There are a lot of people that are going through issues that you've been through. So don't be afraid to ask for help. There are a lot of resources out there that can help you and get you the right treatment and to get you back on the road to recovery.
Welcome back to Resolutions for Recovery. We certainly have a little hot topic going on today, Steve. But the sad thing is when you have kids, what are the numbers for adolescents? Because I know what the data says, but I think the numbers are higher in adolescents, 1 in 9. I still think it's higher than that children are going to have a problem with substance use the earlier that they start to use substances. It's not that they had a predisposition towards substance use, but because their brains they're still freaking brand new. They're still developing.
And when you see
that they get hijacked.
When you introduce any mind and mood altering drug early in life, 12, 13, 14, it goes from this synthetic coping mechanism to this habituated pattern of behavior. We always use this, like, at the end of the week, if I, just smoke a little weed, I can relax and just forget about my stress. And then over time, I can't forget about my stress or deal with my anxiety unless I'm high. I find that on Friday night, if I get together with my friends, we smoke a little weed, we just hang out and laugh. I can't hang out with my friends and laugh unless we're getting high.
Right.
And we do know that marijuana use, as it's introduced earlier and earlier, 12, 13, 14, these are the pre-adolescent, the prefrontal cortex. There are impacts on memory retention. There are impacts on academic achievement, meaning like the ability to follow through. And we talked about it at the break, but there is some data to suggest that if there is a genetic predisposition to mood disorders or schizophrenia or schizoaffective, this could exacerbate the onset of that.
Yes.
And there's data to show that. So.
And unfortunately, I've met parents. Their kids are in nursing homes because they are in a psychosis. Yeah. They're never coming back from that.
And would they have fallen sick with schizophrenia or schizoaffective? Perhaps. But there's no doubt that marijuana triggered these.
But being, if that could have happened at 35, but now it's happening at 15.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there's a lot of wow statements here. And, rather than push back the tide, it sounds like New York State is moving towards legalization. So I see our task, well, particularly healthcare professionals, and you're one of them. In light of this reality, what are we going to do in the way of financial allotments, in the way of education and prevention, in the way of programs? One of the things, and we've talked about insurance here many times, try getting someone inpatient for marijuana dependence. Insurance companies won't cover it.
Nope.
Try to get someone certified for intensive outpatient for marijuana. So even the way the marijuana industry is set up, unless you're on death's door, respectfully, you can't get inpatient. You can't get approval for intensive outpatient. But wait a minute. Those 6 life areas, this is how we assess. By the way, in the book of our craft, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, under the chapter of substance-related disorders, they break it down. Cannabis intoxication and dependence has its own code. Not says Steve Chasman, says the American Psychiatric Association, who puts out this book, and we're in the 5th edition, the DSM. Cannabis intoxication and dependence has its own code. It's a psychiatric disturbance. But yet, insurance companies, there's this mentality of it's just marijuana.
It's just marijuana.
Well, it's just marijuana until it exacerbates itself or progresses to other drugs. Any disease, and we've talked about it, from diabetes to heart disease, early intervention's key. Could you imagine a 15-year-old who's an A student, now is a D student, who used to be a varsity letter person, male or female, and now doesn't play sports anymore? But parents are
just described my son.
And you're finding oils and paraphernalia in his room?
And this is what happens, though, because playing, my son played lacrosse. He was scouted in the 9th grade to play Division I lacrosse. A great athlete, a solid B student. When he said, I don't care about lacrosse anymore, wow, we're much further down a road than I ever cared to even think about. But we were. And that's the sheer fact of life.
Because his obsession?
Yes.
Which are recycled thoughts, I need another, and they lead to compulsions, repeated behaviors, switch from academics and athletics to this particular drug. And the drug we're talking about, which remains at the foundation of the disease of substance, marijuana. So even though we're seeing a host of people for cocaine and amphetamine and Molly and heroin and opiate.
You don't start down that road. You start alcohol.
If we want to look honestly at the whole, it's like looking at an elephant and just seeing the trunk. But,
Exactly.
some of that came from later on down with marijuana, alcohol, and nicotine. And, we're very concerned about it. I know parents like yourself and some parents who are still in the struggle with not only their adolescents, but their significant others, because there are parents who struggle with substance use.
Absolutely.
Marijuana plays a role in that. And I have to tell you, because you and I are both, as Northport people,
Yes.
do a lot of work, and LICAD does too, with our veterans. When I'm hearing that, there is some data to suggest that the use of marijuana helps with, post-traumatic stress and combat stress for our veterans. Well, you know what? There are evidence-based practices or treatment modalities for post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
Seeking safety is one of them. EMDR is another one. I think our veterans deserve a heck of a lot more than giving them an ounce of hydroponic weed and saying, go smoke up, Johnny or Jane Soldier, and forget about your trauma.
Right.
But
because that's the easy way out. You have to get to the core. You have to get to the festering part of the disease and clear the trauma.
That's right.
And if someone were willing to give their life for this country, we are certainly indebted to them on so many more levels than just to make it seem okay.
That's right. And we'd be remiss. And this is my professional and my personal opinion. New York State for the last 5 years, give or take, has had a medical marijuana program. I started my professional career as a social worker in HIV and AIDS. This was in the 1990s, before protease inhibitors. So HIV in the late 80s, early 90s was very much a death sentence. I know friends and I knew clients in the 90s who used marijuana, who sparked their appetite and probably kept them alive a little bit longer to offset some of the pain, some of the medication side effects, and to spark hunger to keep them nutritionally fed and fighting. No one denies the 11 diseases that are currently approved for the medicinal value of marijuana or CBD oils. That's not the issue here. The issue is
it's the same as saying long-acting opiates for people who struggle with chronic pain.
Taken as prescribed, of course.
Taken as prescribed. There's no problem with that. We're not talking about any of those patients, nor do we want to take away what rightfully helps them mitigate their life with their disease.
Right. Young people have said, well, medical marijuana, they have it for, I'm anxious, I'm suffering from ADD, I have general anxiety disorder, I have stress. Stress and anxiety, even though are very real psychosocial, if not physical conditions, are not one of the 11 approved sleep disorder.
But having stress and anxiety is being alive. And we're all going to experience that.
Learning to negotiate stress, learning to work through it and reduce it.
Exactly right.
Through those healthy coping skills. So I can already hear it in young people and in adults that there is a very mixed message getting out with legalization that, it's good for stress, it's good for sleep disorder. No, it's not. No one's right. Listen, you smoke 6 bong hits before bed. That's not sleep. That's passing out.
Correct.
That's a difference.
That's a big difference. That's like also taking, sleeping pills.
Right.
That's an induced state of sleep.
Correct. Now, ideally, I think it would be best to achieve some level of REM sleep healthy through meditation or mindfulness, which you and I are fans of. Even prayer and meditation, beyond my qualification as far as prayer, but and exercise, the greatest reducer of stress out there.
It's one thing, so we talk about kids coming home. When you and I got home from school, whatever was happening in school, you were safe now. It turned off. You were safe in your 4 walls with your family. Right. It didn't continue. So with social media, all of those things, you're bullied far beyond the 4 walls of being in school or being wherever. And learning how to deal with that and turn off from that as a family with, our good friend Kim Laube. What's your family health policy regarding all of these things? That's what needs to be established. That's what needs to be taught to young parents, to young families, to young kids. When you get to a certain place, you can always go to a certain safe place in your mind no matter where you are. Through breath, through mindfulness, through thoughtfulness, through meditation.
And I believe, and you and I have talked about this, those coping skills are not luxury items in 2019. Because when we went to school, there were no cell phones, there were no devices. People are being inundated with messaging and images. I mean, we have 8-year-olds that are worrying about college applications, not 8th grade, 8 years old. They are dealing, and athletics isn't so much a source of pleasure and stress relief as it is a trajectory to a school.
A scholarship.
So even something as pleasurable as athletics, or a young person told me with intramurals, I can't play intramurals because I could get hurt and it can affect what? Like, people are afraid to get with each other. So my point being, and
when you have a 9 and 10-year-old having Tommy John surgery because they're pitching at 9 years old, way too, that their bodies are not capable of doing, we have a problem.
I heard this great analogy, and I forget where I hear it, but I'll credit it to whoever told me. It says, it's just like our phones. When it's inundated with too much data and too much information, and it doesn't have time to catch up, it freezes or crashes.
Yeah.
When our minds are inundated with too much stress and anxiety and fear and information, and young people are asked to do more in school than ever before now with Common Core, the crash is attention deficit disorder, self-esteem issues, self-medication, young people walking into schools with semi-automatic weapons, homicidal ideation, suicide. And we were just talking about an article today where suicide, according to the CDC, up exponentially in the last 5 years. So these are the crashes that we're seeing.
Those are the big crashes.
And people are looking, because it's the nature of human beings, to want to feel good. We don't want to be stuck in fear and anxiety. And, it's a very uncomfortable feeling to be anxious and to be stressed all the time. And the cortisol levels, it really does impact our body. People are looking for relief. We've seen it through pharmaceuticals in the last 15 years, not just in opiates, which in no coincidence are pain relievers, not just physical, but emotional pain.
Absolutely.
And then we're talking a lot about the benzos, like the Xanax, the Klonopin, the anti-anxiety drugs being widely misused, if not abused, and also potentially life-threatening. And as if that isn't a lethal elixir, now we're going to make the wider accessibility to a legalized form of marijuana, which may not cause fatality, but will sedate people and keep them in this very, synthetic, warm, womb-like sedation.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean they're working through it.
No, they're not working through it.
If I'm scared and I smoke a blunt, I may not feel the fear until the drug wears off.
Absolutely.
But then it returns.
Imagine this. It returns, but at a heightened level now.
So what do? I need more of this drug.
I need to smoke more. I need to do more. I need to do, when Thomas died, people said, oh, why don't you have a drink? That was the first thing. Have a drink. Get Linda a drink. I don't want a drink. I couldn't even eat. You need some sleeping pills so you can rest at night. Well, if I need something, I'll take a Tylenol PM. Thank you. At any point in time, I had to sit in my feelings. I had to sit in my grief, whether it was that day or 10 years from now, if I just medicated myself through all of that. All of that I still have to come to terms with.
And
do I do it all in one day?
No.
Hell no.
You learn it, hopefully, and we have to constantly relearn things. When you and I talk about coping skills, and we have for decades.
Absolutely.
What are we talking about? What are we coping with? The emotional spectrum.
Yes.
The fear, the sadness, the stress, the anxiety, the joy, the pleasure.
Yes.
How to experience joy and pleasure. Let's not lose sight. Most people wouldn't take a second hit or a second pill.
Life is still good. Life is always still good. There's something to be grateful for. And when you have, something happened to you, there's something that happened for you too.
And when you introduce these drugs, particularly in precarious moments of stress or tragedy or trauma, or at a young age where behavioral and character development is first emerging, like adolescence, we hit the nail on the head, I think you and I, where it's like it becomes habituated. I'm scared, let me smoke. Okay, no fear. Drug wears off, oh, there's the fear again, got to smoke. Then you're into this habituated pattern.
Absolutely.
And some people where they hit a point where it's like, you know what, I'm smoking 3.5 grams, an eighth of marijuana a day. It's not working. Well, what else you got? Well, you got Xanax? This is what they call the drug use progression or continuum. And we know, even though, and Likehead's guilty of it too, oh, your drug of choice is heroin, well, let's deal with the heroin addiction. We have to be more thorough as a field, as a society. Did marijuana play a role in this? Yeah, like I still smoke, but that's not the issue.
It's not a big deal. Yeah, no, my marijuana
And
didn't get me
parents
in
have to
trouble.
say, hey.
The alcohol didn't get me in trouble. You know, I drink a pint of vodka a day. That doesn't mean anything.
That's like saying the brick on the first floor of your house had nothing to do with what's suspending the second floor.
Exactly.
This is the foundation, not of a building of something healthy, but the building of something potentially pathological or disease-ridden in the substance use disorder. So, you know, it seems like adolescents have a lot stacked against them. It doesn't mean that, and you and I we live in the love. The world's a beautiful place, but if you're sedated, you're going to miss it. And you know what?
You're going to miss it. You're going to miss out on so many things.
And I look back on my life, and you and as an adult, and you and I are friends, so I know this about you. You know, some of the greatest moments in my life weren't the joy and the pleasure. It was the moments that were really challenging.
Yeah.
But I was able to work through them with friends, with support, with coping skills, and I built resiliency. When you think you can't go on and you do, when you think, believe me, after 2 licensing exams and a master's level program, like,
absolutely,
you know, you build self-esteem by doing esteemable acts, walking through that fear. But when the A student becomes a D student, when the B student becomes an F student, the old saying is, if you're not working on something, something's working on you. And if it's drugs, we're really doing our young people and our adults, quite frankly, a great disservice by saying, hey, we're open for business in this dispensary. Come in and get yours. And you could sit back. I mean, could you imagine, and don't get me on contemporary views of society, I mean, 482 channels. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we spent a lot more time with each other?
Or outside.
Hello. I had a young person tell me literally in the fall, he's like, I don't go outside. Zika, he was like,
oh my goodness.
What does it say when young people are afraid to go outside because of the propagated fear that something's going to do harm to them? There's nothing more, and listen, there's danger in everything, but we can't harp on that because
you can't stay in the fear because you're going to miss out. The simple fact of being is just that, right? Just be in the moment. You don't get attached to the good times or the bad times. Just be in the moment. Don't look back. Don't look forward.
So
That's yoga.
Yeah,
right?
Breathe into it.
Breathe into
it. The good, the bad, and the fugly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I say that?
You can say that.
Okay. But, you know, the question is where we're going to move from here. Are we going to make sure that every Long Island or New York school has an evidence-based prevention program in there to teach them?
And that should just, you know, upstate in by Syracuse, New York, they started a program, and now the name of it escapes me. They started it in a school district that had a lot of disciplinary problems. Mm-hmm. They went from 20 kids going to the principal, and we're talking about K through 2, 20 kids having disciplinary problems to 0. Holy, you know what that whole program is based on? Mindfulness.
Awareness.
Being nice to one another, teaching that to 5-year-olds.
Empathy and compassion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And imagine 20 to 0? Wow. Wow.
I mean, that's something to be said. You know, the only time they told me to pay attention was when I was staring out the window in high school and the teacher said, pay attention. But, you know, mindfulness is really being able to sit with all the emotions and be familiar with them. You know, to thy own self be true. But I also think we need to revolutionize, and we're continuing the fight in insurance companies on how they allow people with marijuana abuse and dependence to access treatment. That's something that the state needs to address.
They still need to address. You don't address a heroin addiction in 14 days and then say, okay, you're on your own now. You know, your mind's not even clear. So,
and we fought for those 14 days. Before that, it was 4.
Right. If you got 4.
And 20 years ago, 28 days was the minimum. And
right.
We know the data, and I see your number for outreach. You know, we know Hope House, some of the other places have known for decades that the longer someone is in a controlled environment and learning these healthy coping skills, building a support network, the greater the outcomes for the disease of substance use disorder. Unfortunately, in this country, we get into the fiduciary question of course they need long-term treatment, but who's going to pay for it?
Exactly right.
Even though parents are paying premiums through the roof, we're only going to give you 4. Okay, well, New York State law is now 14, but not a day longer.
Not a day longer.
Marijuana, we're not paying for that.
We're not paying for that.
Well,
but in this country, we don't do anything for wellness.
Right.
So imagine if you could go to the doctor and learn healthy coping skills that you could go to a mental health counselor as a family and be coached through that and have that paid for.
Well, something we've been talking about for years, which is I go for an annual physical. Fortunately, I have no, knock on glass, I have no health issues, so once a year I'm good. My doctor tells me I'm good. I have an annual physical. Wouldn't it be great if you had an annual or biannual mental health physical, where you went in and someone asked you, hey, having any problems with depression, having any problems with your thoughts, how's the anxiety, the stress levels, hey, could I introduce some coping skills? We deal only in pathology. People come to licensed healthcare professionals or they go to treatment programs only when the problem already exists. What about teaching health and wellness, like mindfulness, like coping skills, like communication skills? We're very much on the back end. There are other cultures, particularly in the East, who begin this wellness counseling very, very young.
Very, very
young. With the
young.
development of spirituality, with the development of empathy and compassion. To love thy neighbor truly as thyself. I've heard that here in this country, but in practice it seems to be a little short these days. Mm-hmm. But these are things we can teach a generation who's in kindergarten right now. And like you and I, and maybe we're hatching our master plan or the utopian dream, but if we do this well enough at a young enough age, there may not be a need for self-medication or mind and mood altering.
When I taught religion for Catholicism, right? So I had 8 little crazy boys in my class, first and second graders.
I was a crazy boy myself.
And you love them.
Right.
Why do we teach them to concentrate on what you did wrong? Do you know what we did? I taught them, what did you do right this week? Let's focus on that. Because when they were rewarded for what they did right, they wanted to do what they did right more frequently.
And there's a lot of negative self-talk that goes on the internet.
Too much.
There's a lot of negative self-talk that just inadvertently
you're not cute enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not strong enough, you're not masculine. You're never enough.
Right.
You are enough. You are enough just the way you are.
And when it's not enough, it's okay to acknowledge that, you know what I explained, you and I talked about it, it's okay to fail.
Failure is when you learn.
Most experiments are based on trial and error. It's usually mostly error.
Yes.
We learn, most of my greatest lessons have, even when I've been given great advice and I didn't follow, I had to feel the consequence. I was the big why kid when I was a kid. Steve, don't stick wire hangers in the sockets. Why? Some of us are just adventurous by DNA, but we learn the hard way, but it's learning nonetheless.
It's learning.
Yeah.
It's learning. What did what could I have done better? Not what did I do wrong? What could I have done better to get a better outcome? And wow, I don't want to do that again because I didn't like that consequence.
And there's a great analogy that we use when we speak to kids, and we ask them, how many people, if you had an all-expense trip, would go on the space shuttle? And it's usually like less than a third would say, yeah. But an overwhelming majority wouldn't go on the space shuttle because it's space. They remember when space shuttles blew up. They don't want to be lost. It's an unnecessary risk. Correct. You know what? Drugs are like that.
Yes.
They weigh the risk factor to the benefits. The ones that said they would love to go, well, I want a special experience. I'm willing to take the risk. I want to see the stars. That's a very unique type of person.
Yes.
That wants to weigh the risk outcome management and make the.
And there are risk takers.
Right.
That don't fall into any box. They're just going to try things because that's who they are.
And I am no advocate for drugs, just the opposite, and you know that about me, but drugs for some are a personal choice.
Yes.
Some are willing to take the risk based on pain, discomfort, adverse childhood experiences. Some just want the experience of what they see as enhancing the humdrum or the every monotony day. It's not a healthy outcome. There are other ways to get heightened experiences, but we have to really look objectively, not so much as drugs good and bad, but what real purpose do they serve people?
Yes.
Why are they so interested? And as a country, I think existentially we need to answer those questions in the next few years. Otherwise, we're going to be jumping from one stone to another, from drug of choice.
Addiction will be addiction. Thank you so much for joining us today. This man is just a wealth of information. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you for being.
There's a lot of questions that we have to answer. And the biggest question is, why do we need so many drugs and substances? substances in our society today. Have a great weekend. Have a sober St. Patrick's Day and just get outside. The weather is beautiful on Long Island. Go and enjoy. Have a great day.